The Treaty of Versailles, the war to end all wars. You will learn about the key political, territorial, and economic terms of the treaty and the overall devastating impact of the war. The end arrives. After 4 years of death and misery, Germany agreed to an armistice. An armistice is an agreement to stop fighting, not an outright surrender. The armistice took place on November 11, 1918, the 11th hour of the 11th month of the 11th day. The war was finally over, but at a huge cost. The task of figuring out the terms of the treaty would take an entire year. Lecture outline. You will learn about the impact of the war, memorials that were set up, peace talks, the different leaders of the main countries, the terms of the treaty, the formation of the League of Nations, and the future impact of the war. This was truly a world war. The green denotes those who were allied with the Triple Entente, while the orange represents those affiliated with the Triple Alliance. Many countries around the world were drawn into the war as a result of being colonized by a European power. For example, troops from India fought on the Western Front alongside the British. By the numbers. These are very important numbers to remember because they reveal how horrible the war actually was. 15 million civilian and soldier deaths resulted from the war. Over 22 million were wounded. Many soldiers returned home with not only physical injuries, but mental anguish that they could not shake. World War I memorials. Memorials were set up at a number of Canada's most famous battle sites to commemorate those who gave their lives. Canada's most famous monument is at Vimy Ridge. The symbolism of the monument is striking and communicates not the glory of war, but rather the sacrifice made by the soldiers. The battlefield today. The following images show what the battlefields look like today. Some of these sites are commemorated. Others have been converted back to farmland, while still others have become overgrown forests covering the remnants of war. The Treaty of Versailles would bring together most nations of the world, but would the terms of the treaty result in a lasting peace? History would indicate that the treaty laid the groundwork for the start of World War II. The peace talks brought together 32 nations from around the world and took place in Paris. The treaty itself was signed at the Versailles Palace. Canada represented itself as an independent nation. Prime Minister Borden demanded Canada be given this right after the contributions of Canadian soldiers at the Great Victory of Vimy. The peace talks were dominated by the Big Four: France, Britain, the US, and Italy. Leadership. Premier of France Georges Clemenceau was determined that Germany should be crushed by the terms of the treaty. Remember, Germany had also invaded France in 1870 as well as 1914. President Woodrow Wilson of the US came seeking a fair peace for Germany. British Prime Minister David Lloyd George had promised the British people that Germany would pay. However, he adopted a middle-of-the-road position. The leaders of the Big Four, from left to right, were David Lloyd George of Britain, Orlando Vittorio of Italy, Georges Clemenceau of France, and Woodrow Wilson of the US. The major terms of the treaty. The terms of the treaty were determined in 1919 at the Palace of Versailles, just outside of Paris. The terms can be divided into the following categories: economic, military, political, and occupation. Economic and territorial terms. Germany must accept the complete independence of Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Yugoslavia. Poland would allow travel between East Prussia and Germany. This was called the Polish Corridor. Germany must give up all its rights and titles to its overseas possessions, including colonies in Africa and East Asia. Military terms. After March 31, 1920, the German army could not exceed 100,000 soldiers. The German Navy could not exceed 6 battleships, 6 cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. No submarines or military air force were permitted. Political terms. Germany must accept responsibility for causing all the loss and damage that the Allies suffered. This was known as the War Guilt Clause. Germany must pay for all wartime damages to the civilian population and property of the Allied powers, in particular France and Belgium. Amount would be determined by an Allied commission. These were known as reparation payments. The last reparation payment to pay off the debt was finally made in 2010. Occupation terms. In order to guarantee that the treaty would be fulfilled, Allied troops would occupy German territory west of the Rhine River until 1935. Take a close look at the map to see how the borders of Germany changed after the war. Europe after World War I. Here are a few questions to consider. What are the major changes to the map of Europe? What has happened to Germany and Serbia? Can you predict where there might be future problems? Take a moment and consider each of these questions. Germany and the Treaty of Versailles. Closely analyze this political cartoon and determine who each individual represents. What is the main message the cartoonist is trying to convey? The League of Nations. It was hoped that World War I was truly the war to end all wars. President Woodrow Wilson suggested a League of Nations be established to settle future disputes. The League would be an organization promoting international cooperation. Canada joined the League as an independent nation. However, the League of Nations would not be able to stop Hitler. It is important to note that the League of Nations and the United Nations are not connected. The United Nations would be formed after World War II in response to the failure of the League of Nations. Conclusions on World War I. 4 years of death and misery were over, and the world hoped for lasting world peace. However, the terms of the Treaty of Versailles would ignite new problems in the years to come. The war to end all wars would certainly not live up to its name.